Good afternoon, everybody. How are we doing today? You're listening to 98.5 WNUW LP Aston. My name is Joe Tusio, and we got a lot to get to today, including the NBA trade deadline that ends today. And I'm going to do my big board again this week, going with the offensive line this time. I'm going to discuss the free agency in the NFL as I did on Tuesday's show. This time it will be about the NFC North. But before I get to that, I got to get something off my chest here. Before I even talk about what's going to be on my show today. And Chase Daniel is the topic that I want to discuss first. Because the fact that the Eagles might want him scares folks. The fact that the Eagles are interested in bringing him in to being their starting quarterback next year scares a lot of fans because people don't know what he will bring to this team because he really hasn't played a lot of games because he was primarily a backup last year with the Chiefs and he doesn't really have that many years left. He's not 24. This isn't his second year. He's been in the league for 5 or 6 years. But why this angers me, really, is because of the argument of, do you need a Pro Bowl top 10 elite quarterback to win a Super Bowl? To win the big game? Do you need a top 5, top 10 guy? Is that really what you need? And there can be arguments to go both ways. There is reasons why you would need a top 10 guy, and there are reasons why that guy really doesn't have to be the main guy on your team. And there are teams that can provide examples going both ways, especially last year. Houston is the main example. They were a playoff team that used 3 quarterbacks. 3 starting quarterbacks throughout the year. And none of the quarterbacks would probably be a starting caliber guy on a lot of other teams. Hoyer might on a couple teams. Hoyer could be a guy that you could throw in there if a guy gets hurt that he could start and he might win a game or two for you. But none of the guys were top 10 players. They were not guys that were Pro Bowl starters. These guys weren't signed to these big deals. They were thrown in there, and they got to the playoffs because they had a defense that was able to make plays, turn over the ball, and they could run the ball. The Chiefs. Alex Smith. Now, Alex Smith is no scrub. Alex Smith is a very good quarterback. But he's not in the same talks as, Brady, Manning, Rodgers. But guess what? They made the playoffs as well. And they went pretty far. Why was that? Because they had a top defense that could make plays for them and they could effectively run the ball. And their main running back, Charles, wasn't even playing for the majority of the year. Those are 2 teams right there that have quarterbacks that are not that elite level yet. And they made the playoffs. Manning, you could even argue, was in that same boat for this year. And in no way, shape, or form am I saying Peyton Manning is a below average quarterback. Because that's not the case at all. He's a Hall of Fame type of guy. MVPs, Super Bowls, records. The guy has it all. But let's face it. Honestly, he did not make the Denver Broncos a Super Bowl winning team this year. They had arguably the best defense over the last 2 or 3 years. Miller had an MVP type of game on defense. They could consistently turn over the ball. And they were ranked in the top 5, I think, in every single defensive stat. Or in most of them. They did not win the Super Bowl because Peyton Manning threw up 5 scores and just passed the ball for 400 plus yards. That defense was the reason why they won. And why I'm bringing all this up is because if Chase Daniel is the quarterback of this team going forward for the next few years, can he be a guy that can be a playoff contending quarterback? Now, to the other side of the argument, some teams need that elite style guy. Green Bay is one of those teams. Nelson got hurt. Lacey didn't have that good of a year. The defense was up and down. If that team does not have Aaron Rodgers on that team, they're not that good. Facts. I mean, that's basically the case. If Rodgers is not on that team, they do not make a playoff run. There are few teams that need a top 5 elite talent quarterback to make them the best team that they can be. There are some other teams that have a complete team on both sides of the ball in all three phases of the game. And why I bring this up is because the Eagles right now are a question mark team because nobody knows what they are going to do going forward for next year. Is Bradford the guy? Daniel might be the guy where Doug Peterson might bring him in, and he might be a guy that can make plays. But if Chase Daniel comes to this team and he, if here's how I look at it. If the Eagles defense can mold themselves into a top 10 defense, if Murray, Matthews, and Sproles are here, and if they can effectively run the ball consistently every single game, Chase Daniel can be a decent quarterback. Now, yeah, the guy hasn't played a lot of games. I understand that. But you can't sit here and say, well, we'll just trade 4 first-round picks for some guy that we hope is going to be the next star. We don't know if he is, but let's just hope he's going to be that guy. Sure, trade 2 first-round picks, get a guy like Jared Goff. Maybe he turns out to be that star. Or maybe he's a guy that becomes a bust. Or maybe he's a guy that is an average quarterback. Maybe Chase Daniels is the same way. Maybe if you sign him, he's a scrub. Maybe he has a up and down year. Some games he's really good, some games he's bad. Or maybe if you can trade, let's say a 4th round pick for him or a 3rd round pick for him, and the guy could put up consistent numbers, there you go. The Vikings are another one of those teams. Teddy Bridgewater is not a guy that's going to pass for 5,000 yards. He is a perfect fit for that team. They have a top 10, top 12 defense right now. They have arguably the best back in the game that can do it every single game. And he's a guy that is smart, that can read the defense, and can make plays when they need him to. But they don't need him to throw the ball 45 times every game. Maybe this is what the Eagles have to do. Maybe instead of looking at, trading for Kaepernick or signing a top guy or giving a guy $100 million down the road, maybe that's not what they need to do. Maybe they need to step back and say, hey, if we can develop our defense into being a top 10 defense, if we can run the ball, maybe we don't need to sign a big star. Maybe we can have a guy that can just come in and make the plays that we need him to, and he can just control the clock and control the field when the offense is out there. Because let's face it, folks, there are not many options out there right now for this team. If this was a draft where, there were 5 quarterbacks in this draft and they're all going to be stars and they're all going to be taken in the top half of the draft and the Eagles can take one of those guys, great. If there are 5 guys out there that want to be signed and the Eagles can take, and sign one of those guys long term and he fits that team to a T, great. But that's not the case right now. Bradford, Daniel, or a draft pick is probably going to be the options that you got. Maybe Nick Foles if the Rams let him go or if the Eagles decide to trade for him. But they have no other choice here. And if Doug if Doug Peterson thinks that this guy can be the next great quarterback for this team, then that's what you have to trust in then. Unless you want to trade 5 first-round picks, 4 first-round picks for a guy that you don't know what is good, for a guy that's 21, 22 years old that hasn't played a down in this league in hopes that he's going to be the next star, then that's what they have to do then. If that's what you want, fine. I don't think that's going to be the case this year. Maybe they wait one more year and they go out in next year's draft and hope in getting a top 5 pick and getting their quarterback in that draft. Or maybe they take a second-round pick or a third-round pick on a guy that they hope to grow for 1 year on the bench and could come out and be a star next year. I don't know. But if Chase Daniel is the guy, if they can have a good defense and if they can effectively run the ball, I think he can make some good plays for this team. Or he's just going to be another backup that tries to get a big role and can't do much with it. But that's my little thing I had to vent on today about that. But let's get down to the real business at hand. The NBA trade deadline is slowly approaching us, folks. And there have been a couple trades that went down. Nothing huge. There wasn't any big trade where it's like, man, that's going to change the way that these teams play in the, it changes the whole playoff scheme now. We don't know who's going to play who. We don't know who's going to be the top team now. But some of the trades that went down, the Pistons traded Brandon Jennings and Ersan Ilyasova to the Orlando Magic for Tobias Harris. Seems like a pretty fair trade. Jennings hasn't been that good this year. He's been hurt. He's still a guy that I think can play for a couple more years, can be a good starting point guard. He's not going to be a top 10 point guard, but a guy that can start on most teams. Ilyasova is also one of those guys that he's not going to be a big known star, but he can, score 10, 15 points for you, can start for you, or can come off the bench if you need him to. Harris is another one of those guys where he's not going to be an all-star, at least right now. He's not going to be the guy that gets these big deals. He's going to be a guy that can get you 15 to 17 points a game, can pass the ball good, can make some good shots. And I think it's a pretty fair trade, at least for right now. Another one of the trades went down was a 3-way trade between the Grizzlies, Heat, and Hornets. The Grizzlies received P.J. Hairston, who was, I think, a first or second round pick a couple years back. They received P.J. Hairston, Chris Anderson, the Birdman, a guy who can come off the bench, be a guy that can get rebounds a game, the guy that can get some good dunks for you and doesn't have to play that much. And they got a couple conditional draft picks as well. The Hornets received Courtney Lee, a guy that isn't a big name guy, but can average 10 to 12 points a game for you, can come off the bench, can be a depth guy, can have a decent role on a team. And if a team's going to make a playoff run, that's one of those guys that you want. That if our star guy has to sit out, we need a guy that could go in and make plays for him. And the Heat received Brian Roberts, again, a guard that can make some plays. Again, not one of those big trades that's going to make your eyes pop out and say, man, they traded that guy. It's one of those 3-way trades where teams each got something that they can use. But on to some trade rumors. Of course, every fan's thing to look at and say, man, what if this guy goes here? What if this team trades this guy? Of course, Dwight Howard seems to be the main topic at hand. That seems to be a guy that the Rockets are trying to trade. The Miami Heat are supposedly might have some interest in him. I think Hassan Whiteside is their guy. I don't know why they would want to bring Dwight Howard in. Yes, Howard right now might be the bigger star, but I think Whiteside can put up the same numbers at this point, and he's younger. And I think Dwight Howard has had a pretty good career so far. When he was at the Magic for the majority of his career in the beginning, he was the guy. He was the big guy down in the post that most teams would just love to trade for. LA, when they made that trade, I thought this was going to be the next Shaq. That this was going to be the guy that Kobe and him are just going to make a run, win another title or two. Didn't turn out that way. Rockets traded for him. Again, I thought it was going to be another trade where Harden and him are just going to be a really good duo. They were going to put up a lot of points, be a force in the West. Didn't turn out to be that way. The Rockets might want to trade him now. And I think the return that they're going to look for is pretty big. Because while he's not that young, while he may not be a fit for every team, I think a team that wants him is going to try to offer something up big if they do want him to be on their team. Because he's a guy that can average 20 and 10. And if a team needs that, that might be the guy that they look at. Another thing is that the Cavaliers are looking at Ryan Anderson, a guy that could play the 4, can play the 5, can make some pretty good three-point shots, a guy that can create space, and is a guy, again, that doesn't need to come off. He doesn't need to start. He doesn't need to play 28, 29, 30 minutes a game, but can if you need him to, and is a guy that can be really good depth when Timothy Mozgov or Kevin Love come off. Ryan Anderson can come off the bench, replace the points that they could put up, can rebound the ball well, and would be a really good need for that team and could help out the Cavaliers even more so. Pau Gasol seems to be another guy that teams are looking at. A guy that has been in the league for many years, won a title with the Lakers. Now he's with the Bulls, as most fans know. And I don't know why the Bulls would give him up at this point. I think if they want to make one more run, I think he's the guy that you have to keep. I think he could still play at a high level, even though he's in his 30s at this point. And I think if they do trade him, a team's going to give up probably a good player or a pick to get him. Because, like I said, the guy can still put up good numbers even though he's not that young. So maybe he gets traded in the next few hours remaining that we have here. But one of the last ones is the Sixers are gauging interest in whether or not they want to trade Big Jaw, Jahlil Okafor, the guy that was taken number 3 overall, and a guy that fans love, but I don't think they would be upset if Embiid was a star and they traded him to get another good star on this team. I am a huge fan of Big Jaw. I think he's a great player. I think he's going to develop his shot more now. He was a guy that could really go to the post well, could back up, could dunk the ball well, could rebound the ball well. And now he's learning to shoot those 10 to 12-foot shots. And he's just smooth. His footwork is smooth for a guy that's 6'11", 250-plus pounds. But the thing is that, of course, he needs to learn how to maybe improve his defense. But the big thing is, and I said this maybe my last show or a week ago, if Embiid's the guy and you could trade Okafor for a star, for another young star, maybe a point guard, maybe a top 5 pick, I think you have to at least consider that. Now, if Okafor and Embiid can play on the same court at the same time, that would be amazing. That would be what they need, but I think the way that they play is kind of the same. And I think if you put Noel with Embiid, I think that would be best because that's what Embiid was drafted to play with. Noel was the guy here. Embiid was taken number 3, and they thought that was going to be the next, star forward center combo in the league. Embiid hasn't played yet, even though I hope he does. But if Okafor is traded in the next few hours, that's obviously assuming Embiid is going to be the guy then. But I think they're going to have to at least wait until next year to see if Embiid can be that guy. Because if Embiid goes and they say, well, he's not going to play, Okafor probably won't leave this team. They're going to try to make it work. But if the doctors say Embiid's good to go and he could play for 7-8 years and put up 15 points, 17 points a game, rebound the ball 8 to 10 times, block some shots, make a three occasionally, not saying he can make a 3 every single game, but can space the floor and be that franchise guy that they need him to be, I think Okafor might not be on this team. Now, last week, I believe I did the AFC's, or on Tuesday's show, I did the AFC South. Continuing with that, I'm going to do the NFC North today. And most likely, I'm just going to go back and forth with an AFC division, NFC division, so on and so forth. But today's the NFC North, and let's start with the Chicago Bears, shall we? The Bears. With a cap space of nearly $60 million, plus more if they trade some guys, if they cut some guys. But let's just say, for argument's sake, $60 million. And this is a team that, on offense, doesn't have a lot of needs. They can obviously look at offense. They can obviously look at offensive line. Matt Forte is gone. I think Jeremy Langford takes the load off of Forte of what he did for the Bears for the last 7 or 8 years. Langford's going to be their lead back. Kadeem Carey can obviously come off the bench and run on third downs, catch the ball, can be a red zone type of guy. I think their wide receivers are set. Kevin White hasn't even played yet. And Cutler obviously is going to be the quarterback for the next 2 or 3 years. They're obviously going to have to draft a guy or sign a guy to groom when Cutler's contract is up or when he decides to retire. But the main thing that they can obviously look at on the offensive side of the ball is the offensive line. Their tackles, I think, are set in terms of it's not the number one need. I think Leno on the left tackle and Kyle Long right tackle is good for right now. Their guard spots are kind of set. I think they could use help at right guard. Center, maybe. But for right now, I think the offense is set. On the defensive side, they could draft or sign any guy on defense, and it would help them out. I think they have a couple spots where they have some young guys that are going to be a key piece for their team for the next few years, especially a lot of their draft picks. But I think their positions of needs right now, at least, are inside linebacker, defensive end, safety, cornerback, basically anybody on the defensive side of the ball. Outside linebacker isn't really that big of a need. They signed Pernell McPhee last year. Willie Young and Lamar Houston can man the other side, and they can make some pretty good plays for him. But really, any spot on the defensive side of the ball, I think they could address. And they have a lot of guys that they can re-sign, including Alshon Jeffrey. Yes, the number one receiver in the free agency class right now. A guy that I do not see leaving the Bears unless some team throws $100+ million at him. And I don't think a team's going to do that. And even if they do, I think the Bears are going to match it because they have the cap space. And they don't have a lot of guys that they have to sign long-term on big deals. Jarvis Jenkins is another guy, a guy that played for the Redskins for the last 2 or 3 years. Made some good plays. Bears threw a 1-year deal at him. Made a lot of good plays this year. Is a guy that can start for him. Isn't going to be a franchise-changing guy, but a guy that can start, that can get you a sack here and there, and can stuff the run. Tracy Porter is another guy, a cornerback that made a Super Bowl play, a pick six, to help the Saints win a Super Bowl. Over the last few years, he's bounced from team to team. Hasn't really found his niche yet. Hasn't really found his role. The Bears, again, signed him on a 1-year deal. Made some pretty good plays. Helped them beat the Green Bay Packers at Lambeau Field on a night game, which is rare. At least over the last 3 years, that's been rare. A guy that could play on the outside, could play on the slot. Towards the end of the year, he started to decline, I think. But if you give him a 2 or 3 year deal, I think he could still make plays for them. Especially if you put him in the slot. Sam Acho is another guy. Again, threw a 1-year deal at him. Played for the Cardinals last year. Was hurt off and on. A guy that's not going to get you a lot of sacks, but is going to be around the ball on every single play. Shea Mcclellin. Now, this guy was one that when he was drafted in the first round, I don't think a lot of Bears fans really knew why they did that. He was kind of one of those unknown guys that quickly rose, obviously probably because of his combine and because of the way he played. They moved him to inside linebacker. He had his ups and downs. He got hurt. He didn't play for a few games. Maybe the injury had some impact on why he didn't play that well. But I think if you put a great linebacker next to him, I think he could be okay at best. Okay. He might make a few plays. He was calling the plays last year on defense, which means the team has some faith in him still. But if you put a great linebacker next to him, maybe he might be a guy that can stay there for the next few years. So some free agents that they could look at. Danny Trevathan of the Denver Broncos is obviously going to be one of the main guys and probably the number one guy that they looked at. It was one of the John Fox guys. John Fox knows him, played in his defense, and is going to be one of those underrated linebackers. There's going to be one of those underrated linebackers in this year's class that he's going to get a pretty good deal. And the thing that scares me about a guy like this is that Donnell Ellaby for the Ravens 3 or 4 or 5 years back was kind of the same way. Ray Lewis was gone. Ellerby came in, made some good plays. Miami gave him a big deal. Hasn't played that well. Trevathan is either going to be that, or he's going to be a guy that he's going to go from Denver to Chicago and make the same plays and make the same impact, which is what I think he could do. If they don't look at him, Demario Davis from the Jets is another guy that I like. Can hit hard. Is a guy that has a lot of strength. Had an up and down year. Don't know if the Jets are going to re-sign him. But if he doesn't re-sign with the Jets and the Bears need a guy that can play the run well, can stop him on the line, I think that would be a good guy to look at. And again, the inside linebacker class in the free agency this year isn't that strong. But I think Danny Trevathan is going to be number one on the Bears list. Probably number one on the list of a lot of teams that need an inside linebacker at this point. Cornerback is another spot that I think they're going to look at. And again, these are cornerbacks that I mentioned last show. Trumaine Johnson, Janoris Jenkins, both from the Rams, both the young guys that made a lot of good plays and do not get the recognition that they deserve and have high ranks, play the ball very well. Trumaine Johnson is a favorite of mine because he's got great size. And the way that the Bears GM Ryan Pace does this is that he's not going to be a guy that's going to go out and sign 5 guys at $70 million, even though they have probably the cap space to do that. He's going to build through the draft. So he's going to sign 2 or 3 guys here and there, maybe give a 1 or 2 year deal to a couple guys like he did last year, and see if they can make plays for him and then develop through the draft. Now at the safety spot, they took Adrian Amos last year in the draft from Penn State. Has been a great safety thus far. I don't really know what safety spot he's going to be playing at, but I think he could play both if they need him to. He's a guy that hits hard, that could play the run well. Coverage skills he needs help with, but other than that, he's a pretty good young guy, and he's only in his 2nd year, so he definitely has room to grow. So with that being said, Rodney McLeod from the Rams and Tashad Gibson from the Browns are 2 guys that I look at, guys that are not really that big, but make plays or fast that can turn over the ball. Now to the defensive line, which I think they need help on a defensive end spot. Malik Jackson would be probably every Bears fan's dream to sign. I think Denver is going to keep him though. But again, another John Fox guy, a guy that John Fox knows. The guy this year had a great year. Made a Super Bowl play that is going to be shown over and over again. And don't really think Denver's going to let him go, but if they do, I think the Bears are definitely going to be number 1 or one of the top teams to look at him the day the Broncos do not re-sign him, if they choose not to. But if they don't re-sign him, or if they do, Cedric Thornton from the Eagles and Jared Crick from the Texans would be 2 guys that I would look at. Thornton, again, an underrated guy that can make plays, is strong, can start if you need him to, but if not, he can be a rotational depth guy at the very least. Jerry Crick, again, Houston has Watt, period. But Jerry Crick can be a guy that can start on the other side, and when J.J. Watt goes down, hey, Crick can come in, make plays. He's not going to get you a lot of sacks, but he can tackle very well. He can play the run well. And I think if the Texans don't re-sign him, maybe that's who the Bears look at. And the last spot on the offensive line, like I said, they don't need any tackles. I think they could look at guard. Brandon Brooks from the Texans and Ryan Wendell from the Patriots, I believe, are 2 guys that they could look at. Are guys that can easily start, are going to get probably pretty good deals. But I don't think they're going to really address the offensive line that much. Maybe one draft pick, maybe sign a guy. Kelechi Osemele, I forgot, is actually a guy that I really like. Baltimore's probably going to re-sign him, though, but he's probably one of the best young left guards in the league. They can easily put him at right guard and put him with Kyle Long, and that would be a great duo on the right side of the line. Now, with that being said, let's look at the draft. With the Bears with the 11th pick, they have a lot that they can look at. I think inside linebacker is going to be where they look at least from a standpoint of if they don't sign guy in free agency. And even if they sign a guy like Danny Trevathan, I think they need help on both inside linebacker spots. Jalen Smith from Notre Dame would be my number one guy. That's a guy that, if he wasn't hurt, lock top 10 pick. Lock top 10 pick. Unfortunately, he suffered a pretty severe leg injury towards the end of the year. Maybe that hurts his draft stock, so instead of going from top 10, he goes to the top 15. Maybe he falls to the Bears, or maybe a team takes a risk on him, and if he's ready to go next year, day one, then the team's got a steal of a pick. But if he doesn't, you can at least say that the guy's potential moving forward after he heals up is just top-notch. And I don't think there's been an inside linebacker that's has this much skill, at least from what I've seen, since maybe Luke Kuechly came out. C.J. Mosley's been a good linebacker, so you can kind of say him too. But since those two linebackers have come out in the draft, I think Jalen Smith is going to be one of the next guys to take over the reins as being one of those linebackers that's taken top 10 and just thrives. Myles Jack is another guy, but I think he's probably going to go in the top 10. Very fast, can drop back, pick off the ball, can cover, receivers, tight ends. He's just got speed. He can hit hard. He's got so much strength for a guy that's 6'1", 240 pounds. He can also play running back if you need him to. He did it at UCLA for some games. And that's a guy that, again, got hurt, but he's going to probably be ready for this year come training camp. And as a guy that's probably going to go top 10. So I don't know if the Bears are going to have a chance to draft him. But if they do, if he's there, the Bears are definitely going to have to look at a guy like that. Reggie Ragland from Alabama is another inside linebacker that I really like. 6'2", 250 pounds. He doesn't really have speed, but he has great size, can read the defense well, can clog up the holes well, can read the run game really well, and was a leader on that Bama defense that won a national title. And that's big because the guy's done it. Bama is just like rolling out linebackers at this point. They've had 3 or 4 or 5 even that have gone in the first round or first 2 rounds that have been really good linebackers in this league. So I think those 3 guys you could definitely look at. DeForest Buckner from Oregon at defensive end is another guy that they could look at. Again, Eric Armstead came from the same school, has the same size, kind of plays the same way, but a lot of people like Buckner more. They think his ceiling is a lot higher at this point. And I think if you get him on this Bears D and have Vic Fangio, their defensive coordinator, work with him, maybe he can mold him into being the next great defensive end in a 3-4, kind of like what Watt is now, or like what Fletcher Cox is now. They can also look at cornerback. Vernon Hargreaves is a guy that I mentioned on Tuesday, a guy that doesn't have great size, but skills-wise is maybe the best pure cornerback in this draft. And if he was 6 foot, 6'1", he would probably be a lock top 10 pick as well. So if they don't sign a cornerback, if they address linebacker and defensive line in free agency, maybe they look at cornerback in the draft. Kyle Fuller right now looks like he's going to be a pretty good cornerback. Isn't a lockdown guy, but towards the end of the year looked very good, solid every single game. Teams didn't throw his way a lot, which is a good sign. Because they always say if a cornerback's name isn't being called a lot in a game, that's a good thing. Obviously means he's not really giving up a lot of plays. But Hargreaves may be a guy that they look at. And then again, to round it out, Ashawn Robinson is a guy that I really like. Really good size, really good skills. Like I said, can go anywhere from top 10 to 25, depending on how teams like him. So if the Bears go linebacker and cornerback through free agency, maybe they look to draft a defensive lineman, and Ashawn Robinson will probably be high on their list. Now on to the Detroit Lions, a team that I was shocked they didn't play as well as they did. Their head coach, Jim Caldwell, some people may have thought he wasn't going to have a job, but the Lions brought him back. Obviously, Calvin Johnson may be done after this year. So there's a lot of needs for this team. With a cap of $24 to $25 million right now, they have some needs. Number one, to me, wideout is their number one need. They can also go defensive line, linebacker, cornerback. Again, a lot of spots on the defensive side of the ball they can look at. And if they draft a guy first, second, third round on the defensive side, I don't think many fans would be too shocked about that. And there are some guys that they can look to re-sign. Haloti Ngata is one of those guys that they can look to re-sign. I think he's got 1 or 2 good years left in him. Ansah right now at the defensive end spot is set. You already got one of their spots set. Jason Jones on the other defensive end, they could look to re-sign. A guy that consistently can start. Again, he's not a star, but he can make plays for you. And is strong and has really good size. And then they have a pair of safeties in James Hedabo and Isa Abdul Kudas, however you say his name. The guys started with each other for a lot of the year. They're not big names, but guys that can play, can be a depth type of role if you need them to. But guys that they should at least look to sign if they cannot replace them. And Tahir Whitehead, a linebacker, again, a young guy that is going to make some decent plays for you. He's got some good size, good speed. Isn't a star that you can get on a decent deal right now. And you can at least have him for depth that if a guy goes out hurt, you can at least bring him in and he can make some plays for you. So some free agents that they could look at. Wide receiver, I think, is going to be one of the spots that they look at on free agency and through the draft, considering the free agency class right now. Wideout isn't that strong. But if they do go that route, you got Marvin Jones, Mohamed Sanu, both from the Cincinnati Bengals. You also got Rashard Matthews from the Dolphins and Ruben Randall from the Giants. And I think Rashard Matthews is one of those unique guys because he's not a big name, but he made a lot of good plays. He's a guy that's going to be a possession type of receiver. Isn't really known for one thing, but he does everything well. Doesn't do one thing to the best, but does everything well. Has some okay speed, got decent size. But I think with Golden Tate already there, I think opposite him, you got to go Calvin Johnson type of guy in terms of size. I think you need a big guy that can run down the field and just have a jump ball. You can throw it up to him. Matthew Stafford grew a relationship with Calvin Johnson over the years that they were there. And I think he just needs a big guy that he could say, hey, if I'm stuck, if I'm about to get sacked, I can just throw it up to a big guy and he can catch it for me. So I think the wide receiver spot is going to be an important spot that they look at. Also on the defensive end spot, JPP would be a guy that I look at. The Giants may re-sign him. They may tag him. Even though he may not be 100% with his hand. Even though he may not be able to make the exact same plays that he used to a few years back. The guy is still a great defensive end. Still has 5 or 6 good years left in him. And if the Lions can somehow sign him, pair him with Ezekiel Ansah, I think that'd be a great duo at the defensive end spot. And then you can build from the interior of the defensive line, maybe through the draft. And then at the cornerback spot, Darius Slay is maybe their one cornerback that makes some pretty good plays. Prince Amukamara, again, from the New York Giants, isn't going to, he may not re-sign with the team, so maybe if the Giants don't re-sign him, maybe the Lions can look at him as well. Pair him with Darius Slay, and they can be a duo that can make plays for the Lions going forward. So with the draft, they have the 16th pick. I think they're going to look at pass rush, especially. Ansah can't sack a guy every single play. They're going to need help from the other side and from other spots as well. Noah Spence, again, one of the quick risers of this draft. A guy who had a great Senior Bowl. Doesn't have the best size for a 4-3 defensive end, but can play outside linebacker. Has great speed. Just gets off the line quick and is just around the quarterback a lot for a majority of the plays. Cornerback, again, Vernon Hargreaves is going to be one of those guys that he might fall. If he falls to the Lions at 16, maybe they have to look at him if they fill their other needs in free agency. Shaq Lawson, one of those prototypical 4-3 defensive ends. that they could look at. Clemson had a pretty good defense, and he was one of the reasons why. Robert Kimdiche, a favorite of mine skill-wise. The guy is a top 10 talent. May not go in the top 10 because of some off-the-field stuff or if he's hurt. But if the Lions are sitting there at 16 and a lot of some other guys that they really like aren't there, Kimdiche may be the guy that they can take. Because if they can work with him and develop him and use the skills that he knows best and maybe put him at defensive tackle in that 4-3, that might be the replacement for Ndamukong Suh. Because honestly, I think they miss him. I know they didn't re-sign him, and I think they miss him, and I think he's a guy that made that defense what it was. And I think Kimdiche maybe has the skills to replace somewhat of what Ndamukong Suh had there. And if they don't look a wide receiver in the free agency, maybe if Laquan Treadwell falls, I highly doubt it. Ole Miss's wide receiver had a big year. The guy has great size, about 6'2", 215 pounds, kind of like an Alshon Jeffrey role. Doesn't have great speed, but has tremendous hands. Can run routes very well. Is a guy that's probably going to be the first wide receiver taken, can be taken number 7 or 8 in the top 10, or could go 15 to 20, depending on how teams like him, depending on what they think about him, and how they think his skills will translate to the NFL, and I think he will translate easily. Again, if he's not there, Michael Thomas from Ohio State is another big receiver, 6'4", 200-plus pounds. A guy that's got good speed. Isn't going to be well-known, but is going to make plays regardless of where he goes. So maybe the Lions trade back in the first round and maybe take him in the 20s or so if they want to look at a guy like that. Next up is the Green Bay Packers, a team that I thought were going to be a 12-4, 13-3 team. That obviously didn't happen. Jordy Nelson went down with an injury. Eddie Lacy didn't have the best year that he could have had. And Aaron Rodgers, quite frankly, was off his game this year. Shocking, right? Yes. At one point, I think one game he had less than 100 yards passing in a game. Shocking, right? Yes, I know. But this is a new year for this team with around $20 million in cap space. They have a few needs that they could look at. Tight end is a need that they could look at. They could look at the defensive line. They could look at the linebacker spot. They could always use help on the offensive line. I don't think their offensive line's that bad. But if they need help and there's a guy that could have been a first-round pick or could have been a top 10 pick to fall, maybe to look at a guy like that. So who could they re-sign? Mike Neal's a good outside linebacker. Guy's got good size, good speed. Doesn't have to start, but can if you need him to. Mason Crosby, a kicker, folks. Yes, the kickers, they are players too. They need, they need to get paid as well. The guy's been consistent for him. Hasn't really had many off days. Is a pretty consistent guy, and they can rely on him. Nick Perry was a guy that I like coming out of USC 5 or 6 years back. A guy that can play end outside linebacker, kind of like what Noah Spence is like. I think Noah Spence, ceiling-wise, is better, but he's kind of in the same mold. Packers should look to re-sign him. Could definitely be a depth guy. BJ Raji is a guy that they need to re-sign too, I think. You can get him on a 1 or 2 year deal. Can still make plays, still has some good years left in him, and can just clog up the holes with his size. And maybe they look to re-sign him. James Starks is the last guy that they should look to re-sign. This is a guy that I think when Eddie Lacy isn't on his game, James Starks needs to come in and pick up the slack for him. Period. I mean, I don't know what else to say about it. I mean, it's obviously plain simple. Eddie Lacy didn't have the best year, but when James Starks came in, he made some pretty good plays, and I think that's who they should look to re-sign. So in terms of the free agents, Mercedes Lewis, Jermaine Gresham, and Zach Miller are 3 tight ends I would look at. Each guys might want to look to get a new contract somewhere else, especially Miller. Miller had a great year with the Bears. Martellus Bennett went down. Zach Miller came in, made a lot of good plays. Doesn't have youth on his side, doesn't have youth on his side, so he's not going to be signed for a 5 or 6 year deal, but if you get him on a 2 or 3 year deal, he can catch the ball well, he can block well, and if you need to give him a lot of touches during the game, you can, but if not, he can always block for you for the majority of the game. On the defensive line side, I think they can look at the interior with Nick Fairley, Terrence Knight, and Damon Harrison, especially Damon Harrison, the last one, part of the New York Jets wrecking crew on the defensive line. 3 stars on that defensive line, but I think with Leonard Williams being there and Sheldon Richardson and Muhammad Wilkerson, if he comes back, I think Damon Harrison might look to get a big contract somewhere else, and maybe the Packers give it to him. And you can immediately slot him in at nose guard in that 3-4 and help out the rest of the ends and the linebackers to get to the quarterback consistently. At the inside linebacker spot, there's not a lot of guys on the free agency spot. Jarrell Freeman and Danny Trevathan, of course, they could look at. But I think the Bears might offer him a big contract that he can't refuse. And he has a relationship with John Fox because he played when John Fox was the coach there. So don't know if he would sign there. But if the Packers give him a contract, maybe he will. Clay Matthews is one of their inside linebackers. I think he needs to go back to outside linebacker where he's best. But if he's not, maybe you need a guy that can help him out. Jarrell Freeman or Danny Trevathan could definitely help him out. And at the outside linebacker spot, Julius Peppers does not have a lot of years left in him. Converted outside linebacker. Even though he converted outside linebacker, he still had a great few years there. I think if you look at Courtney Upshaw from the Ravens, this could be an underrated guy that you can sign. And I think he would be a pretty good guy for them to come in when they need him to. Looking at the draft, with the 27th pick, or in the 20s, I don't know if that's correct, but with a pick in the 20s or so, I think Leonard Floyd would be a guy from Georgia that they could definitely look at. The guy could play outside linebacker, guy has good speed, could bulk up a little bit, but can definitely rush the pass rusher a lot and consistently in a game. If not him, maybe Robert Kimdiche or Jaron Reed from Alabama are the two guys that maybe they need to look at. Guys that, again, make consistent plays, can clog up the holes, but Kimdiche is going to get to the quarterback more. Jaron Reed is going to stop the rush more. Now on to the last team of the NFC North, the Minnesota Vikings with Teddy Bridgewater and AP. Yes. The team that was one field goal away from a playoff run, but sadly it did not happen. With a cap space of nearly $24 million, not that many needs, there's not much really to say that who they could sign. They could look at wide receiver if Mike Wallace has not come back. They could look at cornerback and defensive end. Spots that they don't have huge needs at, but they can definitely add depth to. Now, who could they re-sign? Chad Greenway is really the only guy I think they could really sign. The guy's been a Minnesota Viking for a majority of his career. He's been there for so many years. Still makes great plays. So I think that they could look to re-sign him. In terms of who they could sign in free agency, though, at the wide receiver spot, if Mike Wallace has not come back, Brian Quick would be a guy that I definitely look at. Now, this is an underrated guy. He went to the Rams, hasn't made a lot of plays there, but coming out of Appalachian State a few years back, the guy has really good skills. He's got good speed, got good hands, got great size. Came out, I believe, the Alshon Jeffrey year, kind of in the same build. Ceiling's not that high, but if you don't look at Brian Quick, maybe Andre Holmes or Rod Streeter from the Oakland Raiders. They already got Amari Cooper at the number one spot. These are guys, they're not They didn't have great years, but guys that have great size, and I think that's what they need with Stephon Diggs already there. They can play the slot, they can play outside. I think they need size. Now, with the 23rd pick in the draft, I think they're going to look at wide receiver and defensive end. And I think Michael Thomas from Ohio State, who I previously mentioned, and Corey Coleman from Baylor, who I really like, a guy that kind of reminds me of Odell Beckham, yes. He's not going to be that good. His hands aren't that good, but he's roughly 5'11", 6 foot. He's really, he's got great size for only being around 6 foot, got great speed, and has consistently made a lot of plays, can be that guy that just runs down the field and just burns guys, or can run across the middle and make a lot of good catches that way. If not, Shalik Calhoun from Michigan State would be a defensive end I look for. He could play a traditional 43 defensive end, and a guy that could have been a top 15 pick maybe a year or so back. He didn't. He stayed at Michigan State. His draft stock maybe falls a little bit, but I think the Vikings would be a great spot with Everson Griffin already there. This guy could come in and immediately be a depth guy and can eventually start if they need him to. So that's the NFC North. Now, my last thing before I let you guys go is my big board for this week, and this is the offensive line. And I'm not doing guard and tackle and center. I'm not doing them. I'm not just targeting one sector of the line. I'm doing the whole line, looking at 7 guys who I think are going to be the top offensive linemen in this class. Laramie Tunsil from Ole Miss is the guy that is number one. Easily number one tackle in this draft. The guy that could have been the number one tackle. He was the number one tackle going into the year, didn't play for the first couple games. Through the year, though, when he played, he solidified his status as being the number one tackle. Could play left tackle, right tackle. Plays the run well, plays the pass well. A powerful guy. Ronnie Stanley from Notre Dame is my number 2 guy. Can go top 5, can go top 10, can go later after that, depending on who needs an offensive lineman. But a guy that has really good size and has been a consistent linebacker for them. Taylor Decker and Jack Conklin are my 3 and 4 spot. Guys that can interchange depending on, some people might like Conklin at 3. Some people might like Decker at 3. Conklin, as I said before on my show, I believe this is a guy that could play guard if you need him to. Decker could play tackle on both sides if you need him to. Are probably going to be first-round picks. Don't think they're going to go in the top 10, but can easily go from 15 to 20. Maybe the Eagles look at one of them if they slide Jason Peters into guard. Videla Alexander from LSU is my number 5 spot, a guy that had a pretty good year and isn't well known. Again, can play tackle, could slide into guard, has skills to play both spots. And rounding out my spot are a center and a guard. Ryan Kelly from Alabama and Nick Martin from Notre Dame. Ryan Kelly is probably going to be the first center taken in this draft. Again, a Bama guy. A guy that played in a national title game and won, has experience, can be a leader on that team, and is built to play center right now. Some centers have to grow into that role and have to grow with those skills, but Ryan Kelly could probably start right now as a center on most teams. And Nick Martin is a guy whose brother starts right now for Dallas at guard, is one of the best guards in the league already, and has only been in the league 2 or 3 years. I think Nick Martin could follow in his brother's footsteps and start for a lot of teams. Could play center, could play guard, had a good Senior Bowl. Watched him go up against some really good guys ranges from all sizes, and just stonewalled them on a lot of plays. And has his brother to help him out, so he could probably transition to the league pretty well and fairly quickly with that. And with that, I feel like I just ran through all of that pretty quickly, but I want to thank everybody for listening in. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at J_Tusio, Tusio, if you don't know how to spell that. I will update you guys with my podcast for the show if you didn't get a chance to listen to it today. I will be back Tuesday at 11 a.m. You're listening to 98.5 WNUW LP Aston.